Okay, let's work out some sample subnetting problems. The first one that you've got, all the answers are already there, but I want to work together to arrive at those answers together. So, up at the top, the way they're going to ask you subnetting questions and the way you're going to see them, it's going to be different every time. But here's kind of the way we start with that. We say on problem 1, the number of subnets we need is 14. The number of usable hosts we need is 14. And they give us a network address. So take this address and create a subnet mask that works with it, that satisfies giving us 14 subnets and 14 usable hosts. So that's what that problem is asking for. So let's answer some questions about it first. Okay. What's one of those that's really easy to answer? The class. That one's pretty easy, right? What class of address is that? A C. Well, we haven't really done subnetting with anything else, so it's a pretty good bet that it's going to be a C. What's the default subnet mask of a Class C address?
255,
Exactly. 255, 255, 255, 0. Okay, now the hard part. So I need to create a certain number of subnets and a certain number of hosts. So how am I going to do that? Well, just trust me on this one. But I know I'm going to use this last octet, and I'll tell you how in just a second. So I need to figure out where my bits start and stop to achieve what it's asking me for, 14 subnets and 14 usable hosts on each subnet. So how do I know where to draw my line? Well, I go back to those formulas I talked about first. So those formulas were 2 to the S equals the number of subnets, and 2 to the H minus 2 is the number of hosts. The subnets were the bits turned on. The hosts were the bits turned off, as we talked about earlier this week. So I need to figure out what number do I need to plug into those formulas to get those numbers up there. So 2 to the what equals 14, at least 14. 4. That's it. So 2 to the 4th is my number of subnets, and that gives me 16 subnets. So that's more than 14, but that's okay, because I need at least 14 subnets. Okay, so those subnets mean that I'm going to turn 4 bits on. How many bits are left? 4. So those bits are turned off. So 2 to the 4 minus 2 equals what? 14. So with this configuration, putting 1s and 0s in this way, and having my line here, these are my subnets, and these are my hosts.
Well, how did you get that?
Which part?
The zeros and
The zeros and the ones. Okay. I'm using this right here. In this way, it happens to split right down the middle because there's 8 total bits. We'll do other ones where they don't. The other way you can look at this is if I'm going to count to figure out how many hosts I need, I start with 2 right here like you did in the video. 2, 4, 8, 16. And I draw my line there. That gives me 16 hosts. What's left is subnets. If I want to count for subnets, I go the opposite direction. 2, 4, 8, 16 subnets. Draw a line in the middle, that's the separation. So this subnet mask gives me 14 subnets, actually 16, and 14 usable hosts on each one. Okay, so we already established the number of yeah, go ahead.
what are the X's symbolizing?
They're symbolizing this part of the address. Really, they're just, I know I'm not going to mess with them, so I just put in X's to have something there, just to show you that I'm talking about the last octet of the address. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I'll do a little more with that in a second. So here we are. Now we've got our total number of subnets. Well, our formula gave us that. That's 16, right? What's our total number of hosts?
14.
Our total number is 16. That's very easily confused. But our number of usable ones is 14. So how many bits did I have to borrow to make this happen? To figure that out, 4, yes. To figure that out, I say, here's what the default subnet mask is. I borrowed bits from the host portion. Remember, the network portion is all ones, and the host portion is all zeros. So I borrowed bits from the network portion. I borrowed 4 of them. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the bits I had to borrow from the host portion to get the configuration that the problem was asking for. Okay, so now what does it look like if we actually subnet this? So there's 3 parts to that: the network address, the usable range in the middle, and the broadcast range, or the broadcast address, excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first network, which is the 0. How do I figure out what my increment value is? Huh?
Wait. This the. Just you add 1 each time.
I'm adding something each time, but the thing I'm adding is the bit value that falls where this last one is. So it's 16. So 16 is my increment value. And that'll change depending on wherever that last one lies. So if we pull our number line out here, we have 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, and 1. Wherever that last one before that invisible line where our host and our network changes, that's where that increment comes from. So which part am I incrementing every time?
16.
Incrementing 16. Which part of the address gets incremented? Just this last octet. That's the only one I'm messing with, right? So all of these stay the same. And my increment is 16. So I keep incrementing 32, 48, 56. Is that right? No, something's not right. Pull up your calculator. What's 48 plus 16?
64?
64. That was way off, huh? 64, and then 80? 90. 64 plus 16?
Yeah, 80.
80? Okay. 96. 96 plus 16?
112.
112. Okay, so we've already got several of these outlined here, not all of them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 subnets. We actually have 16 subnets in total. If we keep incrementing by 16 at the end of this, we'll have 16 subnets. But let's talk about what's inside those subnets. So if I want to find the broadcast address for the first subnet, excuse me, broadcast address for the first subnet, how am I going to figure out what that is?
32 plus
32 minus 1.
1
Minus 1.
Oh,
Okay, so I want the address that comes before this address. So it's going to be one address less. So it's going to be 31. Now if I want to find out my usable range, I'm going to add 1 to this number and subtract 1 from this number. So I've used all of the addresses on this range, right? I mean, I do the same thing up here, so the broadcast on the first would be 15, and from here would be 1 to 14, all the way down. So if you look, you've got 16 subnets down, and you've got 14 usable hosts in the middle. And here's an example right here. Address 1 through 14 is 14 addresses, right? So just like the numbers told us we would have. Any questions about that? It always looks real easy while I'm doing it. And then, you know, you go to do it and then, I forgot everything. So really, when it comes to subnetting, you need to be able to count to figure out where to put your bits, and then you need to be able to figure out the increment value, and everything else is pretty much just adding and subtracting by 1. So it's that part's easy, but it's the getting going part that's not so much. Okay, let's do another one. Okay. Oh, I forgot one. Okay, now the next one is problem 4. And is that one blank on your handout? There's no answers in it? Alright. So this time we need 6 subnets with 30 usable hosts and a network address of 195.85.8.0. Okay, easy stuff. What's the class of the address?
Class C.
Still C. Our default subnet mask is still 255.255.255.0. So now I need to go about figuring out where I'm going to draw my line so that I can get my host and my subnets. So, how am I going to do that? There's more than one way I can do it. Any ideas? So I can use my formula.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 to the what equals at least 6.
3.
2 to the third. 2 to the third gives me 8. So that's 3 bits turned on, right? Because I'm talking about subnets, and subnets are bits turned on. So 1, 2, 3 bits turned on. How many bits are then turned off? 5. So what's 2 to the 5th minus 2? 30, as it just so happens, right? Look how that worked out so nice for us. So, that configuration gives us what they're asking for. Okay? So that gives us 8 subnets. How many total hosts? Oh, yeah.
I'm confused. How did you get
2 to the 5th?
Yeah.
Okay. I needed to find at least 6.
Yeah.
2 to the 3rd gives me 8 subnets. So then, everything that's not a 1 will be a 0. So then I'm just counting how many zeros are going to be after it.
Yeah.
That's where I get the 2 to the 5th minus 2. Okay. How many total hosts does this give me? How many usable hosts does it give me? 30. 30 usable. 32 total. Usable is always going to be 2 less, remember, because of the broadcast and the network. The ones I put on these columns that I can't use. Okay? So 30 usable hosts. So I have 8 subnets with 30 usable hosts in each subnet. How many bits did I have to borrow to make that happen? 3. So I had to borrow 3 bits from the last octet of the default subnet mask, and there they are. 1, 2, 3 bits. That's what I had to do to make that happen. Okay? So what's my increment value? 32. Wherever that last one is, that's my increment value. So now I have a network that's going to increment by 32. So my first network that I'm going to make, 195.85.8.0, is that correct? Yep. And then I'm going to increment the last octet by 16. Sorry, by 32. By 32. So that's going to be dot 32, dot 64, dot 96, dot 128, dot 160, dot 192, dot 224. 32's to 256. Okay. So that's not valid, right? So I've run out at that point. 256 is not a valid IP address. So that's right, because I have 8 subnets, like we said we did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? So once I figured that out, my broadcast is 31 because it's 1 less than the next network address. And my range is a .1 to a .30. And hey, here we have our 30 usable hosts, right in that range. 32 total addresses because of the 0 and the 31. Okay. Any questions? So,
Where do we get the 3 again? Oh,
Three.
wait, I got it. Never mind.
the 2 to the 3rd.
Yeah, I got it.
And if you want to check yourself, you can do the doubling. 2, 4, 8 subnets. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 hosts. If you just want to count over, there's definitely lots of different ways to do subnetting. So the good news is anytime your 1 stops right here, your increment is always the same, and the addresses in your network, the last octet's always going to look the same, because it's the same math every time. So here's another good question. This is my default subnet mask, but I borrowed bits. So now what does my subnet mask look like? Is it still got 3 255s in it? Yeah. That part, we didn't change anything on that part. We just changed this part. That's this part. So it's still got 255, 255, 255. But this last octet has changed. So now I have a custom subnet mask. And to figure out what it is, I need to add the binary values of those 3 things. So it's 128 plus 64 plus 32. 224. Okay. So we know that we previously talked about how what the purpose of that subnet mask is. It's to tell the computer, hey, this is the part that's the network part, this is the part that's the host part. So putting in this versus putting in this yields different results. If you put in the default, it's saying this whole octet is just for host stuff. If you put in this custom subnet mask, it says, hey, just the last 5 bits are for host stuff. So we would actually use this and input it into the computers as the IP information. Okay. Okay. Let's look at problem 6. I need 10 subnets. Don't care about addresses. I just need 10 subnets. Don't care how many addresses I have, but that's what I need. And my network address is 192.70.10.0. Obvious one, address class is a C. Default subnet mask is still the same, C default mask. Okay, so now I need to figure out how to get 10 subnets.
2 to the 4th.
2 to the 4th. Very good. 2 to the 4th equals how many? 16. 16 subnets. So, what if I had said 2 to the 5th? How many subnets would I have?
3.
Sorry, 2 to the 3rd. 2 to the 3rd. If I had said 2 to the 3rd,
8.
I'd have 8 subnets. And 8 is not enough. So I have to push it up one more. I have to go to the next bit value over. So with 2 to the 4th, okay, so 2 to the 4th gives me 16 subnets. So that's more than I asked for. More is okay, less is not okay. So that's going to mean these other 4 bits are my hosts. And 2 to the 4th minus 2 is 14, right? So I have 16 total hosts and 14 usable hosts. Hey, this kind of looks familiar, doesn't it? It looks like the first problem we did. So our increments are going to be 16 again, right? And we'll go down and say 0, 16, 32, 48, just like we did before. The difference is they asked the question in a different way. So in problem 6 that we just did, it needed 10 subnets. In problem 1, they needed 14 subnets and 14 usable hosts. But both of those things still mean that's where the ones and zeros happen. So what I want you to understand is every time you have 4 bits on, 4 off, 5 on, 3 off, the increment and the way that the subnetting happens is exactly the same. Because the math is still the same. So the part that's difficult is getting started by figuring out where these ones and zeros are supposed to go. Okay, so let's figure out how many bits did we borrow? 4. We borrowed 4 again. So let's go just a teeny step further and figure out a little more information about this. Let's keep going down. What's 48 plus 16? 64. 80, 96, 112, 128. Plus 16, 140?
144.
144. Okay. Okay, so let's look at those questions at the bottom of that page. So when you refer to a subnet, you could refer to this first subnet right here in a couple ways. You could call it the first subnet, or you could call it the 0 subnet. Where did I get that? Because what's there is 0, right? If you're going to refer to this one, you could call it the second subnet or the 16 subnet. So when you see these word problems at the bottom, sometimes they'll try to trick you with stuff like that. Because maybe, the 2 subnet and the second subnet are different numbers. Things like that. So what is the 9th subnet range? Now, look down at the last question on that page that you've got for problem 6. what are the assignable addresses for the 10th subnet? Assignable addresses and the total range are different things. The total range is everything on this line from here to here. The usable addresses are just what's in here. So don't let them trick you with wording like that. So I want to figure out what's the 9th subnet range. Well, here's my 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. There's my 9th subnet. So if I want to figure out the 9th range, how am I going to find the broadcast for that range? Right here. How am I going to do it?
Go back one.
Go back one. 144 minus 1 is 143. So, my assignable address, my range for the entire subnet, I got to go back to this address right here because it's asking for the whole address. The 9th subnet range is 192.70.10.128 to 192.70.10.143. So that's the answer to that first question. So to get that information, I had to figure all this stuff out, and I had to figure out where I was going to put my ones and zeros, and what my increment was, and then I had to at least start trying to figure out where the networks start to be able to get that information. So we can take this one little piece of information at the top, the subnets and the address, and just get tons of information about it and how it's going to work on the network. What's the subnet number for the 4th subnet? What's the subnet number? The network address and the subnet number are the same thing. It's just another way of saying the exact same thing. So you could call this the subnet number too. So for the 4th subnet, what would my answer be? 48. There's my 4th right there. So what's my whole answer going to be?
48.
192.
There you go. 192.70. Yeah, I meant the whole thing. .10.48. So the 4th subnet number, 1234. That's the last octet of the address. We'll put that with everything else, and that's what our answer is. Okay. Let's get down to the last one. The assignable addresses for the 10th subnet. Well, I know the 10th is the one after the 9th, so I guess I don't really have to count again. I can just say the 10th is right there. And I want the assignable addresses. How do I find my broadcast? Well, I don't really have 16 added to that, but let's go ahead and do it, right? That 160? Well, if I know that, then I can just subtract 1 from that and get my 159 of my broadcast. And if I know those things, then I can just add 1 over here, 145, and subtract 1 over here, 158. And that'll give me my assignable addresses. So my whole answer is 192.70.10.144, no, 145. Somebody caught me, I heard mumbling, so that's good. I like it when y'all catch me. 70.10.158. So it's the stuff right here. Questions?